That house on Maple Street was more than just walls and a roof to me. It was where I learned to ride a bike, where I nursed my first heartbreak, and where I always thought I would be welcome. So when my parents called me to the kitchen table that evening with stern faces, I never imagined they would give me 2 weeks to pack up and leave. Their excuse they needed to rent out my bedroom for extra income. After years of helping them financially, their words cut deeper than any knife. The betrayal in their eyes told me this was just the latest chapter in their long history of using me. Before I tell you how I went from homeless to homeowner in 6 months, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson they will never forget. Growing up, our family never had much money, but we had each other. At least that was what I thought. My name is Dean, and at 32, I had built a decent career as a software developer. Despite my success, I always made time for my parents and helped them whenever they needed it. Through college, I worked 2 jobs to send them money when they claimed the house payments were behind. After graduating, I continued supporting them financially whenever they called with another emergency. 8 months ago, after a devastating breakup with my girlfriend of 5 years, I needed a place to stay while emotionally recovering. My apartment lease was ending, and apartment hunting while heartbroken seemed impossible. When my parents suggested moving back home temporarily, it felt like perfect timing. We agreed I would pay $1,500 in rent, which was actually more than their mortgage payment. They said the extra would go toward utilities and groceries. I did not mind. Supporting family was second nature to me. The first few weeks felt comforting. Mom made my favorite meals, and Dad and I watched baseball games like old times. But subtle changes started appearing that I initially dismissed. Dad showed up with a brand new Lexus one day. When I asked about it, he mumbled something about a special lease deal. Mom began wearing designer clothes and mentioned weekend getaways they were planning, all while continuing to complain about their tight budget whenever I was around. One evening, while grabbing my mail, I noticed several envelopes from different banks addressed to my parents regarding refinancing options. Strange, considering they had told me last year they had finally paid off a significant portion of their mortgage. Another night, I overheard them discussing investment opportunities in hushed tones, quickly changing the subject when I entered the room. Still, nothing prepared me for that Tuesday evening when they sat me down at the kitchen table. Mom avoided eye contact, while Dad delivered what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Dean, we have been thinking about our future," he began, his tone businesslike rather than fatherly. "Your mother and I need our independence again." Mom nodded mechanically. "We think 2 weeks should be enough time for you to find a new place." When I asked why the sudden rush, their real motivation surfaced. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We actually have the opportunity to rent your room to a tenant who will pay a premium rate." The shock hit me like a physical blow. "You are kicking me out to rent my childhood bedroom to a stranger." "We are not kicking you out," Mom snapped defensively. "You are an adult. You should have your own place anyway." I reminded them of our agreement that I was paying well above market rate for the room, and that I had been helping them financially for years. I asked for at least a month to find somewhere affordable in the tight housing market. Their response chilled me. "2 weeks, Dean," Dad said firmly, "or we will need you to leave immediately." The next 14 days passed in a blur of desperate apartment hunting. Rental prices had skyrocketed in our area. Every decent place required income 3 times the rent and perfect credit. While my income was good, saving for a down payment on my own place had been impossible while helping my parents all these years. My friend Marcus offered his couch temporarily, and with no other options, I accepted. The day I moved out, my parents were conveniently busy. I left my keys on the kitchen counter and texted them goodbye. No response came that day, or the next, or the following week. Living on Marcus's couch was a humbling experience. His one-bedroom apartment barely had room for him, let alone a second adult. I stored most of my possessions in a small storage unit and lived out of a suitcase. Each morning I folded the blankets and tried to stay out of his way until evening. Through it all, my parents remained silent. 3 weeks after moving out, I realized I still had mail arriving at their house. When Marcus headed to work, I drove to my childhood home to collect it. No one answered the doorbell, but Mrs. Kaufman, the elderly neighbor, who had lived next door for 20 years, spotted me from her garden. "Dean, just missed your parents. They were showing the house to another realtor this morning." My hand froze on the doorbell. Realtor. "They are selling the house." Mrs. Kaufman's expression shifted to confusion. Oh dear, I thought you knew. They have had a for sale sign in the yard for nearly 2 months now. They told everyone you were helping them with the sale. The betrayal crashed over me in waves. Not only had they evicted me, but they had been planning to sell the house for months before telling me to leave. There was no new tenant. That had been a complete lie. They mentioned moving to Florida. Mrs. Kaufman continued innocently. Something about starting fresh where housing is cheaper. I thanked her numbly and collected my mail from the box. Sitting in my car, I sorted through the envelopes with shaking hands. Among them was a misdelivered letter, addressed to my parents from Sunset Valley Casino, thanking them for their gold member status and offering complimentary weekend stays. The pieces were falling into place. Over the next week, I conducted a thorough investigation. I called their bank pretending to be my father, asking about refinancing options, and the representative mentioned this would be their third equity line in 2 years. Through social media checks, I discovered photos of them at various casinos tagged by their friends. One friend even commented, "Hope you win back the house money this time." The truth was devastating. My parents had a gambling problem they had hidden for years. They had repeatedly refinanced the family home, probably using my rent money for gambling rather than paying down the mortgage. Now they were facing foreclosure and planned to sell quickly, take whatever equity remained, and disappear to Florida, all while cutting me out completely. The final confirmation came when I drove by the house again and photographed the real estate listing through the windshield. The asking price was well below market value, indicating a desperate seller. The description mentioned motivated sellers and as-is condition real estate code for a distressed property. That same evening, my mother texted me for the first time since I had moved out. No apology or explanation, just a request for $800 to cover an unexpected expense. When I asked what it was for, she responded vaguely about car repairs. I did not reply. The next day, I met with Sandra, my financial advisor. I had originally scheduled the appointment to discuss budgeting for my new living situation, but now had a very different conversation in mind. "How much do I have in total investments and savings?" I asked after explaining the situation. Sandra pulled up my accounts. "Just under $140,000. You have been quite diligent despite helping your parents all these years." A wild idea was forming in my mind. "Would that be enough for a down payment on a house?" Sandra nodded. "In this market, you could put 20% down on something around $500,000. Your income would support that mortgage." "What about buying a house through an LLC anonymously?" I asked. Her eyebrows raised. "That is possible, though unusual for a residential purchase." May I ask why? I explained my plan, feeling half crazy, even as the words left my mouth. I wanted to buy my childhood home, without my parents knowing I was the buyer. Sandra did not judge, but listed the practical considerations, and connected me with a real estate attorney who specialized in complex transactions. Within days, I had created an LLC with Marcus listed as the manager to hide my involvement. My realtor, Alicia, understood the situation after I explained everything and agreed to help. She contacted my parents' agent, presenting an all-cash offer from my LLC that was slightly above their asking price, but still below market value. The anxious waiting period nearly broke me. What if they rejected the offer? What if they somehow discovered I was behind it? But 3 days later, Alicia called with news they had accepted. The foreclosure timeline had been accelerated, and they needed to sell quickly. My parents had unknowingly agreed to sell their house, my childhood home, to me. The closing process moved swiftly due to the cash offer. I signed the final papers using my LLC, feeling a surreal mix of vindication and sadness. Through Alicia, I learned my parents were thrilled about the quick sale and were rushing to move out before the closing date, having already rented an apartment across town. 2 days after closing, I stood alone in my empty childhood home, keys in hand. The walls that had witnessed my growth now belonged to me. I ran my fingers along the doorframe where pencil marks still recorded my height through the years. In my old bedroom, I found ticket stubs from concerts we had attended as a family tucked behind a loose baseboard. Despite everything, memories of happier times lingered here. Instead of immediate revenge, I decided on strategic patience. I moved in quietly and spent 2 months renovating the property, fixing the leaky roof. My parents had neglected repainting walls and updating the kitchen. Each improvement felt like reclaiming a piece of my history, while increasing the property's value. During this time, my parents remained oblivious. They texted occasionally, always with requests for money, $2,000 for a medical emergency, which social media revealed was actually a weekend in Atlantic City, $1,200 For car repairs, posted photos, showed them at a casino restaurant that same weekend. I maintained radio silence, focusing instead on healing and planning. Their financial situation deteriorated predictably. 3 months after selling the house, I received a desperate message, might need a place to stay temporarily. Apartment raising rent. Can we talk? I did not respond. A week later, through mutual friends, I learned they had been evicted from their apartment for non-payment. The money from the house sale had apparently vanished, gambled away in record time. They were staying in a motel, rapidly burning through what little remained. The moment had arrived. I listed my house for rent at triple the typical market rate for the neighborhood. The advertisement emphasized the property's emotional value. Charming family home with decades of memories, perfect for those who appreciate legacy and tradition. Within days, the inevitable happened. My father called, actually sounding humble for once. Dean, I know we have not talked much lately. We saw this rental listing for our old house. The rent is highway robbery, but it is home. We thought maybe you could help with the security deposit. We promised to pay you back. I asked my property manager, Marcus, playing his role perfectly, to schedule a meeting with the interested tenants at a coffee shop to discuss their application. I arrived 15 minutes early and secured a corner table, my heart pounding with anticipation. When my parents walked in, their expressions cycled rapidly from confusion to shock to anger upon seeing me. Mom clutched Dad's arm as they approached the table. What is this? Dean, Dad demanded, remaining standing. Where is the property manager? Please sit down, I replied calmly. There is no property manager. Or rather, there is, but he works for me. What are you talking about? Mom asked, reluctantly sliding into a chair. I placed the property deed on the table, watching comprehension dawn slowly on their faces. I own the house. I have owned it since you sold it. The color drained from Dad's face. That is not possible. We sold to an LLC. My LLC, I corrected, created specifically to buy the house you were losing to foreclosure because of gambling debts. Mom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly before she found her voice. You had no right to spy on us. Our financial matters are private. Like the private conversation when you decided to evict your son to sell the house I countered. Or the private decision to refinance the home 3 times for gambling money. Or maybe the private choice to cut me out entirely after I had supported you financially for years. Dad shifted to anger, his default response when cornered. We did what we had to do. You have no idea what pressures we were under. Actually, I do, I said, sliding forward bank statements I had found in the house, showing withdrawals at casinos, credit card bills with cash advances, and loan documents with astronomical interest rates. You chose gambling over family. You chose lies over honesty. And you chose to throw away your son rather than ask for real help. Their anger crumbled into embarrassment. Mom began crying quietly, while Dad stared at the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. So this is your revenge, he asked finally, buying the house to throw it in our faces while we are homeless. No, I replied. Revenge would be leaving you homeless. What I am offering is a chance to rebuild with conditions. The conditions I presented were straightforward. They could rent a room in the house, not the entire house, at a reasonable market rate. The rest of the house would remain under my control. They would need to attend gambling addiction counseling weekly and show proof. All financial matters would require complete transparency with monthly reviews of their spending. And finally, they would need to acknowledge the damage they had caused and commit to rebuilding our relationship honestly. This is humiliating, Dad protested weakly. Living in our own house as renters with our son as landlord. More humiliating than being homeless, I ask. More humiliating than lying to your child for years. This is not about humiliation. It is about accountability. They looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that I could not read. Finally, Mom nodded. We will do it, she said quietly. We do not have much choice, do we? You always have choices, I corrected. That is something I had to learn the hard way. The first month of our new arrangement was awkward beyond words. They moved into the guest bedroom with what little they had salvaged from their former life. Resentment radiated from them at every interaction. Dad would mumble about being a prisoner in my own house, while Mom alternated between tearful apologies and passive-aggressive comments. But as the weeks passed, a subtle shift began. The gambling counseling sessions seemed to be having an effect. Dad came home from his third session visibly shaken. The counselor asked how much we think we have lost over the years, he told me one evening, staring into his coffee mug. When I added it up, it was more than the value of the house. More than everything we ever owned combined. That conversation marked a turning point. I began teaching them basic financial management, creating budgets, tracking expenses, distinguishing needs from wants. Mom found a part-time job at a local bookstore and proudly deposited her first paycheck without withdrawing cash for gambling. Dad started attending daily support meetings and eventually found work as a maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex. 6 months into our arrangement, the dynamic had transformed. They paid rent on time every month. The gambling counselor reported consistent attendance and progress. Most importantly, we began having real conversations, painful, honest discussions about the past and how we had reached this point. We were ashamed, Mom admitted, during one particularly emotional dinner. Every time we lost money, we were too embarrassed to admit it, so we borrowed more thinking we could win it back. Then we were trapped in the cycle. Why did you never ask me for real help? I questioned. Dad's eyes watered, something I had rarely seen in my life. Because admitting our failure to our son seemed like the ultimate defeat. We were supposed to be the ones helping you, not destroying ourselves and dragging you down with us. As the 1-year anniversary of our arrangement approached, I noticed my parents had begun looking at apartment listings again. When I asked about it, they seemed nervous. We thought maybe it was time we found our own place, Dad explained. Something small we can actually afford. We have saved a little now. I had been considering my own next steps as well. The house had served its purpose as a tool for healing and accountability. Now it felt like perhaps we all needed a fresh start. At dinner that night, I made an announcement. I have decided to sell the house. They looked stricken until I continued. And I want to help you with a down payment on a small condo. Something that would be truly yours again, but without the burden of the past. Mom started crying, but these were different tears than I had seen before. Why would you do that for us? After everything? Because holding on to anger was hurting me as much as it was punishing you. I answered truthfully. And because I have seen real change in both of you. Dad cleared his throat repeatedly before speaking. We do not deserve this second chance. Maybe not, I agreed. But family is not about deserving. It is about choosing to be better every day, even after the worst mistakes. 3 months later, I helped them move into a modest 1-bedroom condo near their support group meeting location. The mortgage was in their name, but with safeguards I had arranged with the bank to prevent refinancing without multiple approvals. I sold the family house for a profit and used the proceeds to buy a small place of my own across town, close enough to maintain our healing relationship, but far enough to establish healthy boundaries. The journey from that devastating eviction notice to where we stand today taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I discovered that true power is not found in revenge, but in breaking destructive cycles. I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are fighting battles we cannot see. And I realized that setting firm boundaries can actually save relationships rather than end them. Would I recommend buying your parents' house and tripling the rent as a solution to family problems? Definitely not. But I would recommend having the courage to demand truth, to require accountability, and to offer forgiveness, not for their sake, but for your own freedom. The house on Maple Street was never just about walls and a roof. In the end, it became the unexpected classroom, where all of us learned what family really means. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people you love? How did it change your relationship? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story helped you see a difficult family situation differently, please hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most important truths. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, healing is always possible, even after the deepest betrayals.